our octaves. And then we'd have our major third shapes. Minor third shapes. Then we'd have our fifth shapes. Flat five shapes. Then we'd have our sharp five shapes. From there we go to our major seven shapes. Then we go to our flat seven shapes. Go to our major second shapes, or two shapes. Then we can go to our flat two shapes. We'd have our four shapes. And then from there we can do our six shapes. To our octave again. We're thinking chord order. So very cool to kind of work that through. Very cool exercise, kind of working the orbits, and I think this lesson almost deserves a disclaimer, like a warning on it, like don't practice these so much or the mystery of the guitar might completely be lost. Because you really start to kind of see everything in relationship to a root note. When you start playing scales, you may start thinking of those as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 1, or seeing the shape of the 7 or the 6 or the 5 or the 4 or the 3 or the 2. It's kind of part of that scale. Or when you're playing a chord shape, for instance, you may start thinking about that as, oh, well, that's a root, and that's a 5, and that's a root, and that's a third, and that's a fifth, and that's a root. Or that's a root, and that's a 5, and that's a root. and then the 9 on the high E. Gives you a way of kind of calling, reminding yourself and talking with other people about what intervals you're playing with in a tune. Or even building chords out of these shapes can be very cool too. Like for instance, one of my favorite sounds actually is kind of a suspended second chord, kind of a police idea here, but kind of root 5/9 for instance. It'd be a very, very cool shape. And what's really going on here is you got a 5th and then another 5th. So it's kind of like root to 5, root to 5. And I guess you could even kind of keep that idea going. Kind of working that one shape. And you just end up with some really interesting sounds. Taking little pieces and kind of working them together. Or even taking the flat 3rd shapes, kind of a diminished chord shape. Oh, that's kind of a flat 3 plus a flat 3. If you added another flat 3, then all of a sudden we have this cool, fully diminished chord arpeggio thing. So you could take one shape and just kind of drill that idea in kind of an additive way. Kind of doing the augmented, it's kind of root 3rd shapes across the guitar. But even taking 4th shapes, for instance. As a sound to play around with. I want to kind of play around with individual sounds too. I know this has been a monster lesson. Really appreciate you watching and all your love and support. And I hope you'll come back to this lesson, and especially the drill of the orbits to kind of focus in and be able to see the guitar a little bit more clearly with things that you're doing. And you'll just start to see those shapes and everything. It's like, oh my gosh, it's a C chord, but that's a 3rd shape. Oh my gosh, it's a G chord, but that's a 3rd shape. Oh my gosh, that's a D chord, but that's a 5th shape, and that's a 3rd shape. You know, just to kind of start to see things. It's kind of that 5 root, 5 root, 3, 5 kind of way of looking at things. A root, 5 root, 3, 5 root kind of way of looking at things. Or root 3, flat 7, 9, 5 kind of way of looking at things. So hopefully that kind of helps clarify some shape exercises for you and kind of give you some things to practice. And there's no end if you practice these, every day for years. You will start to see the guitar in a completely different light, and maybe start experimenting with some different sounds. And like I said, this really is a lesson that was taught to me by the great Robert Newton III, who taught in Columbia forever. And like I said, if I make any revenue off of this video, I'll pass that on to him, because this is really his lesson, not mine. So best of luck.